Montfort University, Leicester, who are working in partnership with Global Hands International, stated that another part of the Montfort University is encouraging 50% of its students to have international experience, which will also help boost the tourism sector of the Gambia.
At De Montfort, we have two programs. One is called Square Mile, which is a community development program within a mile of the university. Well, the actual Square Mile is now going global, and we're hoping to develop similar things to help and support other communities through Global Hands.
According to Dr. Sala, the donation is a gesture of goodwill, saying it is a way of contributing their quota to national development and also to strengthen national institutions to complement government's efforts in making the library better. Dr. Sala also commended the director of the National Library and his team for their tireless efforts in engaging people both at home and in the diaspora to support the National Library.
My main job is to teach at De Montfort University, and I teach youth and community development. But together with my students and some members of staff, we've also set up Global Hands. And Global Hands is about capacity building. It's about teaching people how to fish rather than give them fish.
Dr. Sala, who is here with 31 students from the UK, describes the importance of their trip and hope that they will be able to engage more Gambians.
The whole idea is not like a cultural tourism. It's a transformative study visit. And we really hope that we'll be able to engage more Gambians, not only in terms of building capacity, but in the near future to also see how we can support young Gambians to go abroad as well, and then also support them to build their capacity with placements and other things that will actually contribute to national development. We believe that the best way that we can contribute to national development and complement government efforts is actually through building people's capacities at the grassroots.
Global Hands International is a social enterprise that was set up by former De Montfort University and current staff aimed at challenging global inequality and building local capacities. They believe in economic independence as well as grassroots development. Dr. Sala, a writer himself, has recently authored 5 books but has only published 2 of those, entitled The Innocent Questions, a collection of poems, and Global Youth Walk. Sala and his team were later taken on a conducted tour of the library by Mr. Mbaye, the Director General. Well, for Dr. Sala and partners, supporting the library has been one of their objectives. Reporting for Grts News, I am Fatou Mbaye.
That story by Fatou Mbaye takes us to our first break, but we'll be back with news from outside the Gambia after this break. Welcome back. The National Transitional Council in the Central African Republic has been holding talks to set out the conditions that must be fulfilled by the country's next president, as many in the war-weary nation call for a leader who will endeavor for reconciliation. Certain members of the anti-Balaka group refuse to recognize the legitimacy of the Transitional Authority. CFI gives us the details.
Council in the Central African Republic met at the National Assembly in Bangui Thursday and outlined 17 criteria that must be met by all candidates for the position of President of the Transition. The criteria include ruling out any former ministers, political leaders, soldiers, members of the National Transition Council, and former rebels. The deadline to apply for the job is Saturday. The Council will announce the winner on Monday. The person who is elected will unify us and must act like the motivating force, a kind of coach to gather us together and allow the Central African people to reconcile their differences. We want a man who is capable, even if he's a leper or illiterate. A man capable of reconciling the Central Africans and to bring peace and security. But before the name of the new president is announced, certain members of anti-Balaka groups refuse to recognize the legitimacy of the National Transition Council. The council was formed under the former Seleka rebels, the already elected former president Michel Djotodia, who has since resigned. We want the council to be reformed, to be made over completely, so that it includes our representatives, so we can participate in the process of this vote. These Christian militias who are harassing the former Selekas are threatening the naming of a new president. If there's no solution, then we will still have our material, and we will take to the streets. Meanwhile, hundreds of Chadian nationals are fleeing the capital, Bangui. They are accused of having backed and taken advantage of the rebellion. Heavily packed trucks head north. All along the road, young citizens of the Central African Republic insult and threaten them. This vehicle, which broke down, could have been fatal for the occupants if it weren't for the presence of African peacekeeping forces who are forced to use their weapons.
A motorcycle bomb blast in Colombia has killed at least one person and injured over 20 others. The attacks are blamed on the FARC rebels. And a 53-year-old man convicted of raping and murdering a pregnant woman has been handed the death penalty in the U.S. state of Ohio. For more on those and other stories, let's go to this CFI News Roundup.
Istanbul to be transferred. An investigation has begun on several magistrates in Istanbul who were recently removed from an anti-corruption investigation which was looking into possible wrongdoing by aides close to Prime Minister Erdogan. This inquiry has already led 3 ministers to resign and a government reshuffle. The government is preparing to vote on a controversial judicial reform to reinforce political control of magistrates. A motorcycle bomb attack blamed on Colombia's FARC rebels killed 1 person and wounded at least 25 others after a local truce by the guerrillas ended. The attack took place near local government headquarters in the western municipality of Pradera. The mayor said FARC was responsible and the Colombian president condemned the bombing as a terrorist act. The month-long truce had been a gesture of goodwill during peace talks with the Colombian government that are taking place in Cuba. The conflict has killed hundreds of thousands of people. 53-year-old Dennis McGuire was executed in the state of Ohio Thursday. He was put on death row for raping and murdering a pregnant woman. He was put to a prolonged execution using a controversial new drug cocktail. It took 24 minutes between the injection and his death. A journalist witnessed the execution.
He gasped deeply. There was kind of a rattling, guttural sound. There was a kind of a snorting through his nose. A couple times he definitely appeared to be choking.
The new execution protocol was introduced after Ohio and other U.S. states with the death penalty began running out of drugs when European manufacturers stopped supplying them. Ukraine's pro-government lawmakers pushed sweeping legislation through parliament on Thursday in an apparent bid to suppress protests against President Viktor Yanukovych. The opposition, which has been leading 2 months of rallies against Yanukovych, branded the vote a power grab. They fear the tough legislation will be used by the government to prosecute them and break up the protest movement. Washington and Europe voiced concerns. Imprisoned opposition leader Yulia Tymoshenko and Western NGOs denounced the move as creating a dictatorship in Ukraine.
U.S. President Barack Obama has announced sweeping changes to the way Washington gathers intelligence. They include changes of the NSA's telephone media data collection program to address privacy and civil liberty concerns. Well, hours before that speech, CNN prepared this report as a preview.
More than 6 months since former NSA contractor Edward Snowden started leaking the details of the government's massive surveillance programs, President Obama is poised to make some changes to the ways Washington spies on the world.
We can and should take steps to make the activities we engage in order to help keep America safe and Americans safe more transparent.
The president is expected to weigh in on one of the nation's most controversial surveillance programs, the bulk collection of Americans' phone records. a practice a federal judge and even one member of the White House's own NSA review panel have called unconstitutional.
It leaves sitting out there a huge amount of information.